It was that laugh. I don't know where it came from. Mom and Dad didn't have it. Gary and I don't have it. It was only Dean's. It started small, then it would grow louder and higher and funnier until he was holding his sides and his face was getting red and tears were rolling down his cheeks. And just when he thought he was done, he would start in again, usually squeaking out, "Oh, that's funny," before ending in a satisfying sigh. Maybe you weren't that funny, but he made you feel like you were, and you felt good. But it wasn't just that laugh. It was his arm around your shoulder, whether he was next to you or not. You always felt that Dean cared about you. I have read that people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I always felt good with Dean. When we were kids, Dean and I shared a room on East Street. I remember very clearly shooting rubber bands at the figures of cowboys and Indians in Fort Apache with Dean, setting fire to a paper sack of garbage on the back porch with Dean, which, much to our surprise, set the back wall of the house on fire very quickly, which we just as quickly put out with the garden hose. Shooting huge splotches on the back wall of the house by loading a cherry bomb in one end of a pipe and cherries in the other end, climbing out the window and sitting on the roof with Dean late on warm summer evenings, and jumping off the roof with Dean, blankets tied around our shoulders because we were Superman. Lots of fun, lots of laughter with Dean. It occurs to me now that there might have been a lack of adult supervision, but it was the 50s. And his arm around my shoulder? Well, when I broke my arm high jumping in the 9th grade, Dean rushed to the hospital and stayed in the room while the doctors set my arm. And when it was time to go back to school, I remember clearly that he walked me to my locker and my first class with his arm around my shoulder. I have scores of pictures with Dean like that. Dean as best man at my wedding, Dean standing with me beside my airplane, Dean with me at Myrtle Beach, Florida, Hawaii, Alaska, Barcelona, Rome, and in a cruise ship casino in the middle of the Atlantic after he won the slot tournament. I can't show you all the times he stood up for me or waited with me all day in the hospital when Drew, less than 2 at the time, was sick, or called to make sure I was feeling all right even 2 weeks ago when he could barely talk. I'll never forget how Dean made me feel. Dean had so many interests. He liked flowers and birds, and he would often call Carol to tell her something he had learned, like how the daylily got its name or how to keep ants out of your hummingbird feeder. He really liked to read about technology, cars, Native American history, dogs, horses, art, and politics. He always had something to say, always had an opinion, was always secure in his beliefs. If the subject was politics, then you needed to come prepared, because he would tell you what he believed in no uncertain terms. You never had to guess what Dean was thinking. But it was dogs and horses and painting that he loved the most. He owned several dogs during his life, collies, a golden retriever, a schnauzer, but his favorite dog was Shep, the dog that followed him home when he was a small boy. We pretended that Shep was the family dog, but clearly she had chosen Dean. Shep and Dean were inseparable. She ran alongside of him every morning on his paper route, stopped at Fair's lunchroom afterwards where they were both given a snack, and curled up beside him on the floor when he was watching TV. One of my favorite old photographs is of Dean, probably 8, kneeling down with his arms around Shep and smiling like he's the happiest kid in the world. I think he was. And his 3 horses, Payday, Candy, and John. He had a knack with them too. He liked to ride, but even more than that, he wanted to be near them, to touch them, talk to them, smell them, just love on them, as Dean liked to say. Only 3 weeks ago, he was telling me that one of the last things he was able to do was sit in the pasture with John standing near him, a warm sun shining on their backs, and John nuzzling at Dean's ear. He thought maybe heaven would be something like that. And his art. It started in high school, continued at an art institute in Chicago, and then became a satisfying part of his retirement. He entered art shows all over Indiana, from Madison to Indianapolis, from Greenfield to the Indiana State Fair. and he had his own showings at Crazy Lake and the Greenfield Banking Company. He learned pottery. He drew cartoon sketches for many of us in the family and for many of the oncology nurses who took care of him at Community East. Those have become prized possessions for everyone lucky enough to receive one. Dean talked for several years about finishing his art studio so he would have a place to work on his paintings. If you've ever seen his den at home, then you know that he needed a large space, since he has always been reluctant to throw anything away. I know he was pleased that he was nearly finished with his studio. He was excited about the painting he would be able to do, and we were all proud of his work. It's priceless to us. Dean loved people. He loved to talk to people, eat with people, travel with people, and laugh with people. He made friends easily and was always loyal to his old friends. He kept his friends from kindergarten, grade school, high school, and the Army. He stayed in touch with his friends either by travel or by phone, but certainly not by email. He always seemed genuinely interested in his friends, was free with his compliments, and wasn't afraid to express his affection for them. He loved family gatherings, especially Christmas, even though, according to Dean, he always received the smallest container of Mom's black walnut fudge. He started the annual Hunt basketball horse tournament and awarded an engraved trophy to the winner. He enjoyed having the whole family for dinner, but he made it clear that, since Mary Jane always went to so much trouble to fix an extravagant meal, we had to arrive at his house on time if we wanted to eat. And he stuck to that requirement, even though we have a number of people in our family who are chronically late. For several years after he retired, he looked after Mom and Dad, running errands, mowing the yard, making repairs, and helping Dad care for Mom. He wasn't stingy with his love. I still remember that at Mad and Scott's wedding 5 years ago, Dean looked happily at Carol and me toward the end of the evening and said, "You two look beautiful." He knew what to say to make you feel good. I will always believe that if you don't like Dean, there's something wrong with you. Dean wasn't perfect, of course. He could be messy. When we shared an apartment on Main Street in the early 70s, Dean chose to use the chairs in his bedroom to store his clothes. One day I needed to wear the one sport coat I owned, but I couldn't find it in my closet. So I asked Dean, and he found it wadded up at the bottom of a 3-foot stack of clothes on the chair. He just laughed. I didn't. When I came to visit Mom and Dad in Greenfield, I liked to sleep late. Without fail, Dean would come over very early, coffee cup in hand, and ask in a very loud voice if I was up yet, knowing I wasn't. Then he would come in and pull me out of bed. He just laughed. I didn't. When Mom wanted ice cream at Mad's wedding, Dean called the server over and said, "Bring her some vanilla ice cream." I didn't think much about it until I received the bill from Arlington, which had an extra $20 charge on it for ice cream, because it was not part of the food agreement for the wedding. When I told Dean about it, he laughed. I sighed. But the one thing you could always count on with Dean was that he would have some sort of trouble with someone when he went out to eat. It started with his tone. It was always, "Bring me," not "could I have" or "I'd like." His orders were usually complicated, so the cooks would often get them wrong, and then he'd have to start over. If the food was slow in coming, you could see him grow more and more irritated. I remember one time when he grew tired of waiting for his roasted chicken, he actually went back into the kitchen to see what the holdup was. From Greenfield to Rome, from Berea to Barcelona, I have firsthand knowledge that Dean was not perfect. But I prefer to think about Dean in the theater of a cruise ship, laughing so hard that tears are running down his cheeks, because he was watching a man on a unicycle juggling balls, spinning hoops around his neck, and telling jokes at the same time. This last year has been tough for Dean, yet I never heard him complain about his luck or feel sorry for himself or talk about being afraid to die. It was clear that he didn't want to die, but he stayed positive and continued to look forward. The last time Dean and Mary Jane were at our house, sometime in early May, we hoped we could plan a trip to Florida or Las Vegas, to a dude ranch in Wyoming, or the air show in Oshkosh. But he got sick the next week and eventually ended up in the hospital. When Carol and I visited him during a period when he was feeling fairly good, he was thinking that he might like to volunteer to counsel some other people with leukemia who were having trouble handling it. That sounded like Dean. There was no doubt that Dean was the favorite of all the oncology nurses, and it's remarkable that they went to the intensive care unit on Saturday and took him immediately to their floor so they could all be with him at the end. And he also said that, although he'd had some bad luck with women, he had gotten it right with Mary Jane. He did. Her courage, determination, optimism, and love matched his. No one could have done more for Dean. So now I'm left with a chunk out of my heart and out of my life. But when I start to feel sorry for myself, I can hear Dean say, "Sorry about your luck, buddy, but for pity's sakes, get on with your life." And then he would say, "Did I tell you the joke about the guy on the motorcycle and the old man wearing suspenders riding up behind him on a bicycle?" And I would say, "Yes, 4 different times already." And he would laugh that laugh, and I would feel good.